Welcome to our virtual discussion about returning to school. I'm Amy Robinson, News Director at WCMU, and joining us right now we have Dr. Stephen Bigelow with the Bay City Public Schools. He's Superintendent. Dr. Bigelow, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also Dr. Jennifer Morse, MD from the Central Michigan District Health Department. So she can handle a lot of the health questions you might have, specifically related, obviously, to health issues. Dr. Morse, thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Bigelow, we're talking back to school. Let's just start with you. Your classes started yesterday. We're getting you right in the thick of the startup. How's it going?
Well, we started yesterday with a remote start. And so the majority, I say majority of our students are at home. We actually do have small groups of students who are attending school on campus. Students in our emotionally impaired and cognitively impaired programs are actually physically here. Everybody else is doing it from the confines of their home. We're using both remote instruction and virtual instruction, and those two terms get thrown around quite a bit, and people often get them confused. But remote instruction means that the traditional classrooms are actually meeting with their assigned teachers, quite often over Zoom, and doing classes that way. And in virtual, the students are going through courses that are already set up for them, but it's not necessarily live or synchronous with their classroom teacher at that time. But so far, so good. Yesterday, a good part of the morning was spent doing all the problem solving that happens when you have people going into the world of online computing for the very first time. But we have most of those resolved right now, and day two is much smoother than day one.
So you mentioned the difference between remote and virtual. Which did more of your families choose?
We had approximately 20% of our students choose virtual, and all the others ended up going with remote. However, when we started getting enrollments for virtual, we were planning on returning to school in a traditional face-to-face environment. Many of that 20% were families who just were not comfortable having their kids in the physical setting anyhow. And at our last board meeting, we opted to go to remote anyhow, but approximately 20%.
All righty. You are in the minority. We received a press release from the Michigan Department of Education. I imagine you're aware that 86% of Michigan districts offer some sort of in-person instruction to start their school year, and yet you are all remote and virtual. Why did you make that call?
Well, I would say that we're actually included in that 86% because we do have some students who are going in person as well. It's through some of our special education programs. So sometimes those headlines can be a little misleading. But as a district, we opted to go remote simply because about a week prior to that board meeting where that decision was made, we participated in a weekly Zoom meeting with our health department here in Bay County, and we get weekly updates. And at that prior health department meeting, there was a caution about a rise in COVID cases within Bay County, specifically within Bay City itself. Our district covers 260 square miles. We actually go a little bit into Saginaw and a little bit into the city of Midland as well. So we cover a large area, but we were seeing a concerning increase within our specific school community. With the warning that it was likely that if we were to start in physical face-to-face, we should expect frequent and extensive disruptions. Meaning it's pretty safe to bet we would have to quarantine either a classroom or entire school at a time just based on the cases that we were seeing within the community here.
I see. All right, thank you. And I understand then the school board will reevaluate your plan on the 12th with a possible change on October 12th with a possible change October 26th if they feel that's appropriate. Okay.
That is correct.
So Dr. Morris, you know, as we hear about the schools reopening, and we're talking to Dr. Bigelow, a lot of the information that they rely on comes from people like you, from the health department. And give us a sense for what you are seeing as you work day to day tracking cases and contact tracing and trying to keep schools and families informed.
Well, it's really difficult because this is all brand new to everybody. So we don't really know the best advice to give people. The best we can do is make assumptions, make best guesses, and really look at how things spread within schools and within that group of individuals. We do know that younger children, mainly those under 10, are less likely to get COVID, less likely to spread COVID. We know the best ways to help prevent spread, spatial distancing, masks, hygiene methods, things like that. And we also know the detriments to not having in-person school. And so we want to try to balance all the risks and benefits of COVID, as well as having in-person versus remote education. And looking at our numbers, so I cover 19 counties. They are much more rural than Bay County and have much smaller populations. And so when we look at our numbers, we might have 40 per 1 million cases, but for one of my counties, that might be 1 case in a week or in a day. So you have to really look at things in that regard. Or we might have a nursing home outbreak. And, is that really going to affect our students and teachers? So those are just things you have to look at. And, we have one county, Clinton County, which butts up against Ingham County. So we have to look at that dynamic, whereas my other counties don't have such urban interactions. So it is very challenging, and this has not been easy for anybody to try to have that crystal ball. I think, doing what everybody feels best about, if there's a lot of anxiety with parents, a lot of gut feelings that things are teetering towards high community spread, starting remotely might be the best for that area. For our areas, again, we've had quite low community incidents, very low percent positivities on our testings. And again, since we don't really know what's going to happen, a lot of the feeling in our areas have been it's worth trying. We can always go remote if we need to, but our area, for the most part, has had low enough activity. But it has been very, very challenging, and none of us know what to do, really. There is no specific blueprint for this because this is all brand new to us.
And I want to remind you, as you join us, that we are happy to take your questions either on education and or the health aspect of COVID, or certainly that intersection. You can put your question in the comment section of Facebook Live or the question answer section if you're joining us via Zoom, and we will relay those questions to our guests. So Dr. Morse, I want to stick with you for a moment. Mask versus no mask, I think it seems to have largely been decided in the medical and scientific community that masking is one way to certainly slow the spread of COVID, and that people should be wearing masks when they're certainly in close contact with other people. And yet we have different regulations at schools, different best practices, as you will, at schools where is it 1st through 5th graders are not required to wear masks. So give me a sense for kind of the minimum mask requirements versus the most protective requirements. How can people kind of vet this out in their own minds on what to do for their kids?
So do you want me to take that first? Or?
I do, yes.
Okay. So the requirements for schools that are in phase 4, which is everyone from the Grand Traverse region down, is that teachers are to wear masks at all times except when eating, and all students are to wear masks at all times other than K through 5 students if they're within their class group, so that cohort at all times and not mixing with any other students. Because we understand it is much more challenging for that group to maintain mask use. However, the safest thing is for everyone to use face coverings as much as possible. So there's what's the rule, and then there's what's best practice. So we really do encourage everyone to use face coverings as much as humanly possible. But we also do acknowledge that we need breaks, we need time to be able to take her masks off. And so I've discussed with my schools that if, you need to go outside and give everybody a chance to take off their mask once in a while, that's acceptable. But with the K through 5, we do encourage that if you can get them to still wear their masks, they really should do that. However, you can give them a little more leniency if needed. With region 6 and 8, which is Grand Traverse and the UP, it's strongly recommended that they do those things with mask use. But again, it is still best practice to wear face coverings. We know that face coverings, as opposed to medical grade masks, vary with their effectiveness, but they're still one of the best ways we have to help block droplets leaving somebody's body, and those might be infectious before they know it. So that's really the point of them, is to help keep somebody from spreading germs. We really don't have proof that they help keep somebody from catching germs. So it's mainly to help prevent someone from inadvertently spreading germs.
So Dr. Bigelow, how is the mask issue working out in real time for the students who are at your school and the workers who are at your schools?
Yeah, it actually has worked out better than I thought that it would for people here within the schools. People are wearing them. They're doing okay with them. And in fact, in talking to some superintendents where students are back in face-to-face instruction right now, it's been working remarkably well. However, if you think about it, this whole mask discussion has been going on for several months now. And by this point, I think most people have become used to wearing them, or at least adapted to it. That's not to say that it's not without its critics. I get contacted regularly on people who want to give me their beliefs about masks not being effective. So, certainly controversial.
Right, right. We're starting to get some questions from our viewers, and thank you for that. We will get those questions to our experts, to our superintendent and our health official as quickly as we can. This is for both of you, and Dr. Bigelow, will start with you, focused on the school issue. What are you anticipating and or providing in the realm of mental health supports for kids and for families?
Yeah, that's such a good question. One of my main concerns about what happens in this virtual environment is how do we properly meet the mental health needs for many of our students. When we're in face-to-face, they're able to physically go and talk to somebody, whether it's a counselor, or in some of our schools, we actually have some therapists as well. We are allowing small groups of students to come into the school as needed. So for example, if we had to do a physical face-to-face counseling session, we certainly can. We're also able to provide some of those things remotely. Within Bay City itself, we actually have an extensive network of mental health care providers that we work with as well. So we're able to work with some of those groups outside of the schools, but to provide that help as needed. The other issue, though, and it's a big issue that I don't have an answer to, is what happens when students don't reach out to us and we have no way of knowing if they're struggling or not. That's really a concern.
Dr. Morris, let's look at the bigger issue, because these kids are going home to families and communities and friends in the communities. What sort of mental health supports are available in communities?
It's mental health in general is an underserved need for kids and adults throughout Michigan, unfortunately, especially our rural areas. We do, in one of my health departments, we do have adolescent wellness clinics, and we do have mental health providers in 6 of those schools. So that has been a huge benefit. We have community mental health available, but often they're quite overworked and it's challenging. Right now, 211 is providing a lot of resources and referrals for individuals. Really, with any need, they're providing a lot of connections for those, even with COVID, to help them find community resources if they're in quarantine or isolation. But they're really, the mental health resources available are pretty much the same as they have been. And the state has gotten an agreement with some mindful meditation apps, and the state website actually does have quite a few, on the coronavirus page, quite a few links to different mental health resources, because this has been definitely a stressor for everybody, young and old alike.
Let me welcome in Brian Pearson from Gaylord Public Schools. Mr. Pearson, thank you for joining us. I know we had a little bit of a technical snafu getting you connected, but we're glad you could join us.
Yeah, thank you. And it kind of reminded me, maybe that's an issue a lot of our students are going to have too when they start. So certainly a little sympathy for them going through it myself. So I appreciate it and glad to be with you.
So your school will be starting up on Tuesday. And here's what I found really interesting when I was looking at your website. Gaylord Community Schools have a return to school plan, as many districts do.
Right.
And as I looked at your plan, well, I looked at the links for your plan and I saw it was written on August 10th. It was updated 3 days later. It was updated 12 days later. It was updated 2 days later. And that was only just a matter of days ago. How crazy has this been trying to figure out how you're going to get students back learning?
Yeah, good catch, Amy. I didn't know people looked at those updates that closely, but you're right. And I think, you know, it's kind of what's happening right now. This is all new to us. And as we go back to school, I've been in this business 34 years, and I never have gone back to a year like this. And so there's a lot of things that we can't predict that we're going to have to adjust to. So we worked hard, try to plan ahead, but also we have to be, I think the word you hear used a lot is nimble. And that's part of being nimble. Those adjustments or updates that you see are us looking at situations that happened and a change in information or something we learned from where we can adapt very quickly and get back in the game and not miss a beat. So that's exactly what happened. And I think any plan, when you look across the state, a good plan is going to have those things almost daily at the beginning.
I mean, in Michigan, we're used to the weather changing every couple days or every few minutes, but not so much our school plans.
Yeah, it's usually pretty predictable what the first day is going to look like. Yeah, there's a lot here that we're gonna learn really quick from the first couple days.
I want to remind you as you're watching this web discussion that you can ask your questions or share your comments, and we will share them with our educators and with our health professional and try to get your questions answered. Going over to Dr. Bigelow, I do have a question here asking about what criteria are you looking for to return the students to school in Bay City, presumably meaning obviously in more larger numbers.
Yeah, so at our September board meeting coming up here in a week, in 2 weeks, we're going to have the Bay County Health Director provide our board with an update of where COVID is within the community, just to give us a sense of how things are trending. And then at the October board meeting, which will be 1 month later, it'll be up to me to provide the board with another update and to make a recommendation. The criteria that we really focus on is what does COVID-19 look like within the Bay City community and how is it realistically going to affect our school building? Will we need to, upon opening up face-to-face instruction, quickly go back to a quarantine situation, whether it's at the school level or a building-wide? So we have 13 buildings spread across the area. Our Western complex is by far the largest with approximately 2,400 kids in that building. And so we look at how many cases are we seeing within that small group, and then what does that actually mean? I just want to remind everybody too that this is actually a board decision. So we have 7 board members who are elected officials of the community. So there certainly is some emotion that gets brought into this as well, because it affects everybody in different ways. But ultimately, we look at, is it safe to return at this point? And I think what's comforting for us is we have some other districts that will be venturing into that face-to-face opening within our region. And so we're certainly going to be looking to see how things are working out there.
All right, very good. With the logistics of returning kids to school comes the finances of returning kids to school. What is your budget looking like right now, and what are you anticipating into the new fiscal year that begins October 1st, correct?
Yeah, so we have been very intentional with our budget over the last several years, so that I'm pleased to announce that we're in a strong financial position right now. But that's not to say that COVID does not come with incredible expenses. We actually, in preparation for what I thought would be a face-to-face opening this fall, we have purchased all the sanitizers, the spraying machines, the desk dividers, all of those things that you would hope to see in a safe face-to-face opening. And we were able to use some COVID funding in order to do that. So that's been helpful. We actually spent, it certainly took a hit on our budget, especially when you think about last spring when we were continuing to keep everybody employed during that time. And it's not just teachers, but it goes beyond into custodial staff and bus drivers and those sorts of things. So we're working through that right now, but we're actually in a pretty good spot. We're in a solid position. And we're happy about that, but we purchased the majority of our supplies that we need so far. So there's some comfort there.
And Mr. Pearson, how are the numbers looking in Gaylord?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting times in schools, educationally and financially. We're in a similar spot as Dr. Bigelow when he said financially we're in decent shape. We went into this year at about 19% fund equity. We certainly want to save some of that money for situations, and this is a good time to use it. The difficult thing budgeting was this, is knowing what we were budgeting for. So you mentioned the financial year starting October 1st. The other variable was, are we going to be fully online? Are we going to be face-to-face? If we're face-to-face, we're looking at a commitment to social distance students. And so classes all of a sudden go from 28 to 21 to 22. That means hiring staff. When you cross that line and hire staff, which we recently did, I don't know if we're going to be shut down 2-3 weeks from now. I hope not. But we made a commitment to that person that we hired to come to Gaylord, and we're going to honor that. And so we spent a great deal of money that we didn't plan to staff for this COVID situation. So that certainly, it's interesting because before I'd look long-term and say, that's 5-6 years down the road. Long-term now is 6 months or a year down the road. Really short-term is a matter of weeks or months. So we can financially make it through this year with this increase, but it's going to be difficult looking 3-4 years down the road to continue to carry this additional expense without additional funding. So if you want to call it short-term or long-term for about a year, I see that we're going to be okay. But yeah, we did take on a sizable amount of staff to accommodate that social distancing in the classroom and our distant learning platform.
Well, and I guess we should have you explain. We'd spoken to Dr. Bigelow about his return to school and how it looked, but tell us what you offered students, what Gaylord is doing.
Yeah, we offer both a face-to-face and an online program. So back in May, we came out that we're going to go full online. We're going to offer that as an option, and then we thought if we have full online and full face-to-face, anything in between we can work that balance and accommodate. So as it turns out, we're opening on Tuesday face-to-face, which we're happy with. We're a school district of about 3,000 students. 600 of those will be online, K-12 students. So we took our teachers, our curriculum, transformed that into a distant learning platform. And so it aligns directly with what's going on in the classroom daily. And so if we have to go back and forth and online, a student, for instance, maybe gets COVID and have to go online, we can accommodate that, and I'm not going to say it's going to be 100% seamless, but the fact that it's our curriculum and our teachers, I think there's certainly going to be a closer match. So yeah, I guess if you do the numbers there, that's about 2,400 students face-to-face and 600 of those online.
So what kind of feedback are you getting from parents? This is such a stressful time and such big decisions having to be made, and you're sitting at the top making decisions that are affecting their children and their lives. What sort of impact, what sort of feedback are you getting?
You want to take that, Mr. Pearson?
Go ahead. Looked like you had an answer there.
That's
so.
okay. I was going to start with Brian and go to you,
it.
Dr. Bigelow, but go ahead. What are you hearing?
Well, it really is 50-50. So like I said, we were planning on a face-to-face start to school up until our prior board meeting. And I was receiving a considerable number of people informing me that was a terrible idea and I was putting everybody at risk. And then we ended up going to either remote or virtual, and the other 50% let me know that was a terrible idea and there is no risk. And so regardless of where, what the decision is, half the people are really upset with me.
All right, it's the classic, you can't please everyone. Are you seeing the same thing, Mr. Pearson?
You know, I am to some degree. In the situation we're in, we can give you a choice. And so if you want to go online, go ahead and go online. If you want to come face to face, go ahead and come face to face. So, you know, there's people, because this, you know, is, you know, this pandemic is certainly novel. I think the words that's being used and relatively new. There's so much unknown, so people have a lot of different opinions. What we try to do is make those not political and look at those as being personal opinions in what they decide. So being able to offer that has helped quite a bit. So we're able, people can make their individual choice and decide whether they're going online or face to face. The difficult part, well, there's a lot of difficult parts, but one thing that we've spent a lot of time in this district, has this state in this country, reforming education so it doesn't look like it looked 100 years ago. And so in other words, you go in a classroom 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, a successful classroom, all the students are in a row, facing the same way. It looks like a COVID classroom. They're facing the front, they're social distance, nobody's saying a word. And we've transformed education into social environments. And we know that students learn best when they collaborate together. And so the real trick is, and that's going to be an adjustment as we come back, because we don't want to abandon that collaborative learning. What we need to do is be creative in how we make that happen. And that's a real paradigm shift in, you know, how we're training our teachers and how we're working going back this year. And it's going to be difficult for our students too, because before it'd be, you know, turn and talk, get in groups, flexible seating, very popular strategy, common that you see in classrooms. And so that part of it, you know, is going to be a real struggle as we get back, and something that we're going to need students, parents, community, teachers to all work together to make that successful.
Dr. Morse, I want to, go ahead,
sorry.
Dr. Bigelow.
I was just say, that is such a good point about, you know, we've been striving to truly change this industrialized notion of education, which has been around towards the 1800s. And yes, the COVID classroom right now is that very old stagnant model that we're trying to break free from. At the same time, I think there's a huge paradigm shift that is coming out on the other end of this because of the COVID experience, and that is a hesitancy among many to even give virtual or online or hybrid versions of education a chance. And because of that, we know that people are much more comfortable now in that virtual environment as well. So I do think that when we get through this in its entirety, our very traditional notion of education will forever be changed. I think overall for the positive, but it certainly takes this rough patch to get through to get there.
Well, and is this a silver lining of COVID, Dr. Bigelow, that if you had tried to really offer online education to any meaningful extent pre-COVID, it would have been an uphill climb. That's not to say it's easy now, but certainly many, many more people are on board and have the tools to do it because they, you know, simply have no choice.
Yes, I think about all the time I had wasted driving around meeting with groups, when now we can certainly do that with Zoom. However, a large part of me appreciates those interpersonal connections that happen in real time as well. So it will be all about finding that happy balance.
Dr. Morse, let me bring you back into the conversation. I'm going to have you look into your crystal ball a little bit, maybe for some long-term planning. So what is that, maybe 3 months down the road? But what do you think we're going to see, you know, from, as you said, from a health perspective, looking at people's behavior and what we know about COVID right now, how do you foresee this school year playing out?
Well, I mean, just really long term, we'll need about 60 to 70% of the population to be immune before the pandemic will be able to end. And right now they expect about 15% of the population's been infected. So we have a ways to go. Vaccine availability at the earliest would be the end of the year, early next year. And if it's a 2-dose vaccine, it'll take 65 million doses. for the US and 17 billion doses for the world. So that's going to take a while. So we're looking at probably another year and a half probably before this is over, but it'll get better. You know, we'll get more and more immune, and we're already seeing that we're seeing less hospitalizations and severe illness seem to be stabilizing. We're doing better handling it. What my hope is for schools, because I've had several schools already starting, we've had cases in schools that, you know, got infected before school started. You know, we identify their close contacts, we work with quarantining them. My hope is that we just get into a groove with it, and that we don't have to shut down schools, that we avoid having outbreaks. There's two main reasons that we'd have to shut a school. One is, like Bay City's looking at, is that the community spread is so high that there's a risk for spread in the school, or that you think that stopping school will help stop the community spread. So schools are a big factor in the spread of influenza. So same idea is that if we stop school, we might help stop the community spread. The other would be if there's an outbreak within the school and we need to stop school for either 5 days or 14 days to break that cycle. Hopefully, if we can identify a case, quarantine the cohort or the individuals around that case, we'll be able to prevent any major disruptions in education. So my hope is that we'll get into a groove and we'll be able to have a new normal. I'm sick of that term, but to have a new normal and get into a groove with things. But we may, I mean, you're going to have cases, you're going to have outbreaks, you may have temporary closures. I really hope we don't have a second wave and have to close schools again like we did last year. That's my biggest fear, is that that happens, but fingers crossed. You know, we see influenza causing school closures every year. I'm hoping that parents and teachers are a bit more eager to get flu vaccines this year, so we don't see that happening on top of COVID, because obviously that's not what we need this year.
Shall we make a pitch here? Flu vaccines are available in many areas right now, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yes, and go get them.
I want to remind you, as you're watching this virtual discussion, that we are taking your questions or comments. You can share them either via Zoom or Facebook Live, and we'll refer them to our panelists. So I'd like to come back to our educators for a minute. And Mr. Pearson, let me ask you, so when I was finishing up my graduate, undergraduate, and graduate classes, I had some online classes. Personal experience, I felt that it was a more enriching environment and I learned better in the classroom. What are your thoughts on that? Can kids learn as well virtually, sitting home through a computer, as they will in a classroom?
You know, if we did it the way, I'll give an example. A few years ago, we decided to launch an online school, and it was a failure because we tried to do it the same way we taught online. And you know, here's one thing in our research at online school this summer, we put a committee together with our teachers and really looked at what are the best practices and how can we go about this different to be successful. Interestingly, the number one factor in student success in face-to-face is engagement, in developing positive relationships. Guess what it is online? It's the exact same thing. The number one indicator of a student being successful is online is not the curriculum, not the pacing, but are they engaged? And do you have a good relationship with that student? So what we had to work with is teach our teachers how to develop those relationships with students from a distance. That's different than what you do directly. I mean, something as simple, you know, right now, shaking hands used to be common. You know, there's a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, and that isn't so common today. So how do you still greet that person and welcome? It's the same with a student. And so working with our teachers, how do we first and foremost hook that student? And the second thing we're going to do is make sure that we give them frequent and meaningful feedback. And so you can look in a classroom, a student hands in a paper, the teacher may say, thanks a lot, this looks good, I'm looking forward to reading tonight. I'll get it back to you in a couple days. What happens online is you push a button and it goes off someplace, and who knows? Who knows if it got there? Who knows if it's in the teacher's inbox? So understanding the importance of, as soon as that comes in, getting back to that student, thank you, just received your paper, really looking forward to reading it, and I'll get back. Those have to be more intentional. And I think we took that for granted when we had online education before. So now that it really has, it's really a key and integral part of our program and our platform, making it successful and looking at it and not just saying, we're just going to take what's in the classroom and just do it online. We're going to take the curriculum, we're going to take the standards, we're going to put it there, but the delivery system has to be different. So we've spent a summer working on that. And that's why I believe we're going to be more successful now than we were before. And it goes back to what Dr. Bigelow said too. We're learning a lot through this. We're forced to do this. Otherwise, I'm not sure we'd be in this situation where we would be embracing the online distant learning platform like we are now.
And Dr. Bigelow, you have, as you said, some perhaps special education students getting kind of that face-to-face in-person education, but you have a whole school full of students who are online. Give us a sense for, adding on to what Mr. Pearson said about some of the tactics you're using to really engage those students.
Yeah, we have been focused on providing professional development to our teachers on how to be successful in that remote learning environment. Because we knew that, even when we were planning on face-to-face instruction, we were also planning on, there's a good chance we're going to end up having to shut down at some point. And so we wanted to make sure that our teachers were being trained in how to engage with the students. We are in year 3, and it's just fortunate in timing of having a hybrid program in our district. And the hybrid program was really designed to meet the needs of our at-risk high school students, where traditional school structure was not working, but to expect them to go into the virtual world and be successful was also not reasonable. And so we merged the two. We had drop-in centers and people who were constantly sitting down working with them to pull them through the instruction, because as Mr. Pearson said, engagement really is the key. I would prefer to have all of our students back in face-to-face. As we think about how do you engage a student at those very early elementary years, that's incredibly difficult to do through a computer. We're fortunate that we have a lot of partners in our parents who are spending the time to do that, but that's not with everybody. And when we have them in our physical building, we're able to control that environment. So that's incredibly important. I see the virtual aspect for our high school students being preferable in some cases. While that actual interaction with the teacher is vital, many of our high school students are able to self-monitor themselves, where virtual does provide a more attractive option for them. The engagement has been hit or miss, quite honestly. What we learned last spring when we went into full remote is that for a good portion of our students, they were actively engaged, but there were some students where we didn't hear a thing from them, and trying to get a hold of them was incredibly difficult. And so that's an aspect that is very trying during this time. And that's where we're really relying on our teachers, our counselors, our administrators, and everybody. It's a full effort to make sure that we're reaching out to these families and connecting with them.
How are your teachers adapting to all this? We've just asked for a big pivot from them, and how are they doing?
They are doing far better than they would have believed they would do in this. It's remarkable how adaptable they truly are. And at the end of the day, they're all about working with kids. And whether it's physical or it's virtual, they've done exceptionally well at making those connections. I'm very proud.
What is their biggest challenge been?
The biggest challenge is technology not working, and we're getting better with that. Sometimes, my technical expertise is, well, did you turn it off and turn it back on again? And usually that works. But sometimes even at the household, we have issues where, we could be dealing with a small child where maybe the parents or grandparents don't have the expertise. So walking them through that process, that is going well. We're getting through it. So yeah, actually things are working fairly well. We were concerned about things that a lot of people don't think about, internet access. Not everybody has internet access, and fortunately throughout most of our areas, our students do have access to internet, and where it's not accessible, we've actually provided hotspots for them. And so we've broken down that barrier, but that was a huge concern early on.
Oh, Mr. Pearson, that's something you've experienced up in Gaylord. It's so rural, and I recall, didn't we do a story on your school offering a Wi-Fi hotspot in your parking lot over the
True,
school?
in the parking lot, and you know, our community has been very helpful too. So there's been, you know, churches, businesses, you know, a library in town that have moved, and I'm not a technology guy, so they're Wi-Fi access points. I'm sure there's a technical term for those, to the exterior of the building. And so people can come in their parking lot and park and utilize the Wi-Fi. So that made a big difference, because we could get a lot of our students that have Wi-Fi in their home and get a direct connection with them. We could also provide some hotspots to those students, but there were some cases where those hotspots would not work in the rural areas. Being able to drive in to a church parking lot, to you know, the parking lot of the library, to our schools in those parking lots, load something back up, is a way we can make that work. Yeah.
And do you also face challenges though with transportation, with
Sure. You
parents
mean,
getting into the hotspots?
yeah, certainly. You mean is delivering them, or?
Well, I'm a parent. I live very far out in a rural area. I may not have reliable transportation, and yet
Yeah.
how do I get into this hotspot to pick up what I need?
Yeah, certainly. Good point. And there were some students, you know, we ended up with a very small number of those students, fortunately, that we delivered packets to. But most of them were able, at least once a week, to get into an area. You know, we had businesses in different areas of our community that opened up. So it worked fairly well. Not ideal, certainly, but it did work.
Dr. Morris, as we look at the overall impact of this health crisis, how much, if any, of the discussion at, for example, a health department, a community level, focuses on this issue of technology? It certainly becomes kind of our go-to way to communicate. People even use it even more so than they used to perhaps for medical appointments and such. Is this something the health department, you know, kind of works on as well?
One of the big issues we see and that we struggle with for individuals is transportation, especially with medical issues. With technology issues, that's been one of my concerns with all of this, has been lack of internet for some individuals. But on a broader scale, I know we struggle with a lot of our clients and individuals not having reliable transportation. But we are always cognizant about people's preferences and abilities with different technologies, internet, phone availability, and things like that, as we do either communication or marketing or education on different health events and things.
As we talked about a little bit earlier in the program, funding for schools, you know, another thing I guess we should talk about is state requirements, if you will. How many days are you in class? How many hours are you in class through the year? What about attendance and enrollment? How do you do a head count in a pandemic? I'm just going to put a toss up out there, and one of you gentlemen perhaps can start explaining some of those issues to us.
Well, I'm happy to start. First of all, it's a complete nightmare, to be very honest. Just the attendance aspect right now. So when you have everybody in school physically, it's very easy to do that attendance count. But when we're trying to do it virtually, it's difficult. So we're looking for what's called two-way communication. The teacher and the student have to be communicating back and forth, and that has to happen on a regular basis. And that is difficult when you're reaching out to the student, but you're not hearing anything back from them. And so that's a huge focus, but we need to do that to be able to count them for attendance. As far as days and hours, there's some flexibility with that this year because of COVID. But we are meeting all of those requirements. But to say it's easy, it has been a complete. I mean, we're day 2 into it, but it will be a complete nightmare as we go through the school year. But we'll do it.
You know, the
Um,
difficulty we have, I agree with Dr. Bigelow, it is difficult. So we're running both platforms. So we're running the face-to-face and have different rules for attendance there, and then the two-way communication with the virtual. So we're running both. So there has been, it's still the 1,080, 180 days. I mean, that's still intact. There is some, the 75% attendance, I don't, you probably heard that number before. If you have 75% attendance, you can count the day. The reality is you could count the day, but you may get penalized for every percent you drop below 75. So that rule has been waived for this year, but we still have to have, you know, those 1,080 hours in those 180 days scheduled. And we have those. I'll tell you, we shortened our day a little bit because we shortened lunch, and students aren't going down to the cafeteria for lunch. They're eating lunch in the classroom with the teachers. So we did shorten the day to allow us a little more time to clean once those students get out there and have to get the students out of the building and do some thorough cleaning. So we were able to shorten the day a little bit by shortening lunch and taking a few minutes off from each class period.
What about the head count for your per pupil payment? What will that be based on this year?
So it's going to be based on 70% of last year's count and 25% of this year's attendance. So our attendance has held fairly steady. It has gone down a little bit. We've seen some families choose to go to private or parochial schools in the area where they are doing face-to-face. The majority of the school districts around us are in remote instruction as well, so we haven't really experienced a loss that way. But it is helpful for us that, again, that will be based on last year's count. 75% of it will. What'll be interesting to see is what happens next year when we get back to, I mean, we're hoping to get back to normalcy this year, certainly. But a lot of the families who have opted to make that change for this year, my guess is they're going to stay within that school that they elected for the entire school year. It'll be interesting to see next year how many families end up returning into the public system.
All right, we're going to start to wrap up this conversation, but I do want to ask you each to come up with, kind of your final thoughts on returning to school and COVID, and we'll start with the broader health issue. And Dr. Morris, what are your thoughts as you look at the situation we're in right now?
Well, I just ask that everyone continue to have patience with everybody, and I've heard from others, including my kid who went back to school this week, that people do seem to be pulling together and doing better than we expected. And I hope that continues, that we all just pull together and realize we're all in this together. So it's going to be an adventure. It's going to be a process of learning, of pivoting, of, like you mentioned earlier, edits and changes to our plans. We're going to have to be flexible, and this is going to be a learning process. And we'll look back and we'll say, gosh, we did it. But we can't nitpick. We can't criticize. We can't fault each other for not knowing what to do, because this is all brand new. So we just have to be patient with each other and do the best we can do in this situation, because it's the one that we have right now.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Dr. Bigelow, your final thoughts.
Oh, I'm scrambled with thoughts. It's all I think about every day. I really want to get our students back into school and feel safe about it. We have the precautions set up, but I'm always concerned about what happens if we end up with an outbreak in the building. And while the students, we hear that they've got strong immune systems and they'll be okay. We do have students with compromised immune systems. I also worry about what happens when they're going home, the parents or grandma and grandpa and those sorts of things. So I'm hoping to hear something miraculous coming out through public health, that things are looking up and up, and we are incredibly resilient with this, and brighter days are ahead. And I'm also looking with great interest to districts of similar size to ours who are opting to go back to the face-to-face, just to see how things work out in that community. But I'm hoping to hear something really positive and encouraging soon.
All right. And thanks for joining us. I wish you the best with the rest of your school year.
Thank you.
And Mr. Pearson, your final
Yeah,
thoughts.
I'm kind of going to mirror what Dr. Morris said. What's difficult in this situation is whenever we go through a problematic situation or something bad, we try to figure out how to get back to normal, and we prepare, how do we get back to where we were? The reality is the start of the school is not back to where we were. So what we're planning for is a complete shift. And I think that's really, really difficult for people to wrap their head around. And, it took me a while to sit down and say, okay, I'm not working to get this back to what it was last year. I'm working for something that I really don't know exactly what it looks like. And so it's getting back to what Dr. Morris said, is have patience, understanding, and it's working together. My concern is we're getting some divide in our society, and people are taking sides. And the fact the way we're going to be successful educationally getting through this is we all pull together, and we're all pulling on the same side of the rope for our kids. And I think keep that the focus, the greater good of the students that are at play here, and that we all pull on the same side of the rope. And you fall down, we pick each other up, expect that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to learn. It's like you pointed out at the beginning with our return to learn plan. Guess what? We revised it 3 times already in a week and the kids haven't showed up because we've learned a better way to do it. And that's what I ask, that patience, understanding, let's pull together for the greater good.
All right. And I wish you the best with your school year as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this virtual conversation. We want to thank our guests, our panelists, Dr. Stephen Bigelow with Bay City Public Schools, Brian Pearson with Gaylord Community Schools, and Dr. Jennifer Morse, MD, with the Central Michigan District Health Department. I'm Amy Robinson with WCMU. Have a good day.